All right, I'll get us started. All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to Historical Trends and Future Predictions in Environmental Law, Ethics, Compliance, and Consulting, Alumni Perspectives. I'm Brian McGonigal. I am the Manager of Alumni Community Engagement for the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences, as well as the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station. Thank you for joining us. Just a few things I want to go over. Mics and videos for the audience are muted for this session. This session is being recorded. We will post it online after the event, so you can access it anytime. We will also share it directly with you in a follow-up email that will go out to all the registrants. We're going to have a panel discussion, and then we're going to have some time at the end of the event for questions and answers. If you have any questions at any time during the event, please feel free to enter those in the Q&A box. It'll be at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will answer those in turn, time allowing. Right now, I'd like to introduce our moderator. Cymie Payne is Associate Professor at Rutgers University with appointments in the Department of Human Ecology and the Law School, focusing her scholarship on international and environmental law. She has argued environmental cases before international courts, and she is currently involved in the negotiation of treaty to conserve marine biodiversity. She is a fellow of the American College of Environmental Lawyers. Cymie, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. And thank you for organizing this. This is really a wonderful event. And I'm just in awe of our panelists tonight. They have fantastic careers. I'm going to give a brief introduction to each of them, and then we'll have kind of a roundtable discussion. So first, I'd like to introduce Kelly Johnson, who is specialized in energy law. She got a Bachelor of Science at Cook College in 1986, and then followed that up with joint degrees in a law degree and an MPA in environmental policy at Indiana University. She has been senior counsel to the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee and the Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General and Acting Assistant Attorney General in the Environment and Natural Resources Division at the U.S. Department of Justice, our nation's lawyers. She's now a partner and a member of the Executive Management Committee at Holland and Hart in Washington. And for those of you who don't know, Holland and Hart is one of the leading big firms with a number of offices around the country. So being on the Executive Management Committee there is a very distinguished position in the law firm world. Next, I'd like to introduce Rich Hubner. And Rich, I apologize. I should have asked you to pronounce your last name for me.
It's Hubner. Ever since we lost you, you know, people get it.
Thanks. Rich Hubner. Rich is an expert in health risk problems in occupational safety training, strategic client management, and other aspects of business. He got a Bachelor of Science in Biological Sciences and Biochemistry at Cook College and followed that up with a master's degree in public health focused on environmental and occupational health. He worked at the Environmental Protection Agency, and I hope you'll be mentioning a little bit of that experience for us because I'm very interested in hearing about that.
Sure.
He's currently a principal consultant at the British Standards Institution in Virginia, and so we'll be hearing more about what he's doing currently. But let me turn next to Peter Anderson. Peter is a specialist in corporate compliance, environmental law, and white-collar crimes. So you're getting a different perspective on these subjects from each of our speakers. And Peter got his Bachelor of Science in 1986 from Cook College and his law degree from University of Virginia. He went from there to a clerkship and then to the honors program at the Department of Justice. He's formerly an environmental crimes prosecutor in the environmental crimes section at the U.S. Department of Justice, which is a really interesting branch that's getting a lot more attention now. He's currently the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer at Carnival Corporation in Miami, Florida. And you should know that Carnival is one of the largest cruise lines in the world. So this is an extraordinarily interesting position, especially now in the time of COVID, I imagine. So I'd like to invite you, in the order in which I introduced you, to tell us a little bit about what it was like for you when you were at Cook College, what you did then, what was your path at Cook, and how did your undergraduate experience relate to where you've gotten today? And I think we'll talk a bit more about your careers in the kind of modern context in the next round. So if you can bring us through that. So Kelly, can you start us off?
Sure, thanks, Cymie. It's a pleasure to be here today. I think it's kind of interesting. I've had this 30-plus year career as a lawyer. And when I was an undergrad at Cook College, I never imagined being a lawyer. No one in my family was a lawyer. I assumed I was going to go in and work for, a government agency or a nonprofit, save the world. But I did an internship while at Cook for New Jersey DEP in the Office of General Counsel, and really found it to be an intriguing job or an opportunity, and decided that I, seemed like I could probably do all right at this law thing. But I wasn't really sure about being a lawyer. So I went for a joint degree that Cymie mentioned at Indiana. I applied to a couple of different schools throughout the country for masters, and then also for a law degree, figuring, if this law thing doesn't work out, I will be able to always go back and do what I intended to do, which is go work for a government agency. And 30 years later, that has only happened as a political at the Department of Justice. So not in any way what I expected. No.
Thanks. Rich, what was your path like?
Sure. So when I went to Cook, I participated in what was probably the most, everybody when I was at school had the same aspirations. We were all pre-med. We were all going to go to med school. We're all going to be doing that sort of thing. And we all graduated and we realized we all weren't going to med school. So what do you do? Well, I ended up applying for and getting a job working with the US EPA on their field investigation team, which is the group that, and this was back in the late 80s, and we still hadn't found all of the hazardous waste sites in the United States. And so we were the people putting on those moon suits and going off into God knows where to find tanks and drums and all kinds of things that were just left. No principal responsible parties. What do we got to do here with regard to contamination? Trying to get them all listed on the national priorities list, which is what Superfund was put aside for, which I'm sure you're all learning about at one point or another, which funds the opportunity to get these sites cleaned up. From there, it became quickly evident that I really had a knack for environmental and occupational health, and I knew that I needed to go back and do something about it. So I went to UMDMJ to get my master's degree. So I'm proud that I actually went to 2 schools that no longer exist in name only. So I'm pretty proud of these degrees, have no bearing on anything whatsoever. But after that, I went and decided that I could do a really good job advising clients on strategic management of chemicals and products and some toxic tort cases. And so I started my own consulting firm, which I had for about 15 years, which worked out great. And then suddenly you get a little old and you have a kid and you decide maybe it should work for somebody else for a change. And so that goes into something else. And now I work for British Standards Institute, as you may know as the primary developer of ISO, International Safety Standards, for all kinds of companies worldwide. I'm on the consulting side for those companies that don't really know how to get there. I primarily advise on occupational health issues. So that's anything within the fence line, dealing with worker exposures, ergonomics, things that could happen to people. We also touch a little bit on the environmental side as well. And that kind of gets you up to where I came from with regard to my Cook experience all to the present day.
Great, thank you. Peter, how about you?
Sure. And again, consistent with Rich, with a little twist, when I came to Cook, I had been, since the age of 7, absolutely convinced I was going to become a veterinarian, and Cook was the way to lay the foundation. And sophomore year, I was making good progress, and I checked my requirements to graduate, and I said, wait a second, I have to take an environment, I have to fill this column in the environmental policy, and there's this course, environmental law, and I might as well get it out of the way. And so I took it in the spring of my sophomore year, and I found I loved it. And then I took another one. This is with Professor Goldfarb, who was instrumental. I took another course, and he pulled me aside and said, why vet school? Like, you really, you got to understand that, environmental law allows you to open up a whole new kind of skill set. You can get involved in policy and economics and law and science and technology. And it was, once I had those 2 courses under my belt, it completely, that's the power of an amazing professor and the grounding that I got at Cook, completely redirected my interests. I ended up taking the VCATs and the LSATs, and I did really well in the LSATs and not so well in the VCATs. So I felt like the universe was speaking to me. So, and similar to Kelly, I also had an amazing 3 different internships, 1 in the summer and 2 during the school year, where basically I was able to have internships with the New Jersey DEP, the New Jersey Attorney General's office, and then kind of a hybrid hazardous waste siting commission. And those internships for me really reinforced the theory that I was learning about in class, and really gave the real tangible practical aspects of what environmental law really was. I did work for a year after graduating from Cook at Allied Signal as a paralegal in-house, before really, I wanted to see what lawyers did on a day-to-day basis inside a corporation. And that reinforced, once again, the need to go and get the advanced degree. And again, after law school, I was really drawn because of one of my internships that focused on hazardous waste crimes in New Jersey and the history of our efforts as a state to address that, and really was drawn to the role of criminal law in kind of changing behavior, both individually and corporate. And it kind of led to my path from law school into the environmental crime section. So it was an interesting kind of mix where I wasn't going to go to vet school. I was going to go to environmental law, but until I graduated, I had no real idea what at the time it was broad. Now it's even more broad. Where would my niche be within the broad field of environmental law and policy enforcement? And we'll get to the next phases, in terms of each job opportunity opened up another chapter and another layer of interest.
So I'm interested, you've each said that you came to school, to Cook, to Rutgers, with an idea of what you wanted to do. And you then kind of switched, kind of moved in a different direction. And so were there particular courses that were still useful to you? Or did you kind of feel like, well, I could have done anything. I could have been a poetry major. Could you talk, maybe just kind of quick reflection on what you thought your education gave you that you took with you forward?
I'm happy to jump in on that, because what I found as a trial lawyer, the skills that I learned, and I was in the honors program at Cook College. And so to me, I love with Barbara Goff, she was another instrumental professor that it was so interdisciplinary that we would read scientific, we'd read poetry, we'd read logic, and kind of make the connections. So I always find in environmental law, as Bill Goldfarb had always told me, it's so interrelated, the different aspects. So to me, I remember my logic class that I took, I would think, how's that going to help? Instrumental in terms of analyzing arguments as a lawyer. My technical writing class that I took, I still teach people how to convert really complex things into layman's terms. And I use what I learned in that technical writing class where I thought, how is this going to help, right? And then the English, just the writing in general. And I remember taking with Peter Sandman, Environmental Communications, was an unbelievable course that taught me the role of the media and how you change public opinion. And again, a ton of things I never knew at the time how I would use them, but I still draw, because I'm still in the environmental field, I draw on a lot of those interdisciplinary, not just the scientific. And one of the advantages of Cook was I got a strong science grounding, but yet I was able to like get enough of the liberal arts to help the strategic critical thinking, writing, communicating. So
Yeah, thanks.
So one of the challenges of going after Peter is he tends to take all of your good arrows from your quiver, and so you can't say the technical writing, because absolutely 100% took the same class. The number of I mean, I've run into some really, really smart people who can barely conjugate a verb, and it's really difficult to express to them the importance of most of the stuff I do, particularly with regard to occupational health, at one time or another goes up to the C-suite, goes up to somebody on the corporate board reporting level. Rarely do those people have any sort of scientific or technical background. Typically, they have business degrees. They could probably tell you everything you need to know about margins and how they need to worry about differentials with regard to stock prices. But when you start talking about technical science stuff—
Rich, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Can you define C-suite?
Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies. No, that's $1 I owe you for using an acronym. I should. C-suite's the corporate suite. And so just like you see in Hollywood, where there's always that one level of the building where all of the people who spend far too much time drinking coffee and making decisions that impact so many other people, which when we talk about the future, how that's getting reined in under a new program that's being rolled in. But that group of people really makes the decisions about how to spend large sums of money for corporations to do big projects, whether it's for environmental impact, whether it's putting new facilities together. The big concern now being resiliency for climate change. How's the money going to get spent? Peter's absolutely right. If you can't articulate scientific information in a way that can be absorbed and understood by people who haven't the same background, you're sunk. What I found Cook was really instrumental in helping me with is it's a binary thing. Number one, analytical thinking. So it's one thing to be able to take a test and regurgitate the answers to everybody. And organic chemistry has a lot of that in the first half, where it's like all the series of chemicals, all the series and the nomenclature associated with them. It's rote. Right? What I learned, took and use every day, that part of that Swiss Army knife is, how do you apply that information? How do I take it and synthesize that information or those tools? And if you think of Cook College, if anything, think of it as a toolbox where you've been putting tools in and you didn't even know it. So the idea of being able to analytically present and think about information and synthesize solutions as opposed to just regurgitating the problem. Far too many people can regurgitate the problem. What my people are looking for, my clients are always looking for, is, don't tell me that the models, don't tell me about all the regurgitating the problems that we're dealing with. How are we going to fix it? What's the solution? The second piece, and this is also a little bit of what Peter said, but also something that goes further along the line. I was really jealous of people when I was an undergrad who seemed to have had this like golden path. Their life was an unbroken boulevard of green lights. They knew exactly what they were doing for the next 35 years, right? And I graduated and then said, and there was an abyss, right? And I think one of the things that Cook helped me with, I mean, Peter's a perfect example, and so is Kelly. You have friends of yours who you probably wouldn't realize, but somewhere down the road, we all get elevated because of our talent, our skills, and our expertise into positions where that kind of network is made it possible for me to, when I started my company, to reach back to people at Cook and actually bring people in to help me with the work. So it's okay not to have a grand, glorious plan, because frankly, you'll find your way. The universe always finds a way to take care of you. And the confidence that I received from understanding and talking to advisors at Cook, who said, listen, nobody knows what they're doing here. Anyone who tells you that they do, they're really faking it better than you are. And just having the confidence to know I could always go back and rely. And it's decades after, and we have one person on the call right now who's been decades since we've had our classes together. I still could probably pick up the phone and pick his brain at any time. That's the kind of thing that really drove me forward, at least in my career, knowing that I had that foundation from which I could reach upwards.
Yeah, thanks. That's really, I like the image there of the green lights in the abyss too. I think many of us feel that way when we get towards the end of the 4 years. Kelly, we were just talking about what was there something with this change in your direction as you went to graduate school and then into your career that wasn't exactly what you'd planned when you came in as a freshman. So what did you learn at Cook that you took with you, that stuck with you?
I don't think we can hear you. I'll translate for her. Not knowing Peter as well as I should and not really spending time with Rich was a big no.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, I apologize for this. I had to switch computers. So I think for me, as I know Peter and Rich mentioned, it's definitely the analytical skills and the ability to look at a problem and think it through. I also think it's really important to learn to be a good writer, whether or not, you know, you are a science person, an engineer, whatever you end up doing, becoming a good, concise writer is a skill set that will serve you well throughout your entire life. You will learn as you kind of move up the career chain and as everybody gets busier, you know, you don't have time for these large, huge documents. People who can write concisely, convey the information, convey the issue, can convey the recommendation in a short, sweet document are going to be the ones that do pretty well. I mean, you know, unless you're going to go be a professor, no offense, Cymie. I mean, they just, you know, there's not a lot of jobs where, you know, you don't get paid per word. You get paid for actually being able to convey an idea. And that's a skill I do think you really can hone as an undergrad.
So Kelly, can you tell us a little bit more about who you need to communicate to? So you're in a big firm, you must have a lot of lawyers as well as clients. What's that like?
It's a combination. I think one of the skills I learned, I spent 6 years of my career in the Senate. And when you're working directly with senators, I mean, again, talking about busy people, you need to be able to do a very complex issue, pros, cons, recommendations in 1 page worth of bullet points. And most lawyers cannot do that. And that was a skill that has served me well. And now, you know, in private practice, it's often, that's what my clients want. My clients are in the C-suite that Rich mentioned. And that is what they want. This is the issue, this pros, cons, and recommendation. And so it kind of, it really works well. And I try the folks the associates and younger lawyers who work with me, that's a skill I really try them to get them to understand. I mean, it's not appropriate for everything. Sometimes you need an in-depth analysis and you need the 30-page memo. But at this point in my career, I'm not doing that 30-page memo. I'm going to have somebody a lot younger than me do the research, write it up, and then work on how best to convey that information to the client. And, you know, I'll sure Peter, when he deals with outside counsel, that's probably something he wants from his attorneys.
Thanks. That's so. I especially appreciate that because that's one of the assignments I give my students is, you know, get it in 1 page. So thanks for the backup on that. What about the world has changed a lot. It's not just you guys that have changed, but the world around you has changed. What kinds of things can you reflect on about changes in historical trends and, you know, maybe, well, just challenges that you faced in the course of the career? And Kelly, you want to pick that one up?
I guess for me, and Peter and I are the same generation. I mean, when we started, environmental law was really just getting started. The laws had just been passed, the regulations were getting drafted, and we spent the initial part of our career kind of interpreting them, whether it was on the enforcement side or the defensive side. That body of law, there hasn't been tons of changes to the statutes and minimal changes to the regulations, just for a variety of reasons. So for me, at least, it's kind of evolved into, compliance, other issues that have evolved through time that just we couldn't imagine when those regulations were drafted. If you look at the National Environmental Policy Act, I do a lot of public lands work. Those regulations were, drafted nearly 50 years ago. It's a different world.
Yeah.
But the regulations haven't changed.
Yeah.
And I would add on my side of the fence, it's really about awareness. So I distinctly remember when I was with EPA going on a site, and it was near a paper mill. And if you've ever been near a paper mill, there's a particular smell associated with the rendering of wood into paper. And I mentioned it once, and somebody who had grayer hair than me at the time said, "Son, that's jobs you smell." And I never forgot that because decades later, I went to a similar facility, and the same sort of people who I expected to say that sort of thing said, "I wonder what that's doing to my kid." So in the span of a relatively short career of mine, well, it's not that short, it's 30 plus years, we've gone from don't start doing something that's going to close the plant that puts food on my table to how can I make sure that the stuff that they're putting in the air, the water, the soil isn't going to have some deleterious effect down the road for my children or my grandchildren. That awareness that environmental protection and engagement, because we do protect some certain places, but we don't engage on cleanup and recovery as much as we do now. That change has really changed the conversation as to what we can be doing. Now, are there still nasty hazardous waste sites that require significant time and treasure in order to clean them? And yeah, maybe there's less of them, but now I don't have to spend as much time convincing people that it's in the general good to spend money to make the world a cleaner place. It's more of an understanding that the impact from these operations may give you a day-to-day paycheck, but it's not going to cover the medical bills of what you're going to have to deal with potentially down the road. That transition has been striking to me, at least.
Yeah, and Rich, I would build on that. And Kelly, you're absolutely right. When we had started out, it was just kind of beginning to take shape. And when I was at Rutgers, it was so funny how traditional lanes were created. The good guys worked in the government or in the nonprofit. The bad guys who sold out, and believe me, I was the same attitude as I would never work in a private firm. I would never work for a corporation. That's why I actually worked at Allied Signal, now Honeywell, as a paralegal before law school for a year, just to see whether my theory actually played out. And suddenly the world became very, very gray. And I saw incredibly committed people within corporations solving problems. I just had a very black and white perception of good and bad. And that's where I wanted to make it clear. So that's why I wanted to do environmental prosecutions, right, when I got out. And lo and behold, in doing a number of those, I realized, wait a second, we have to go upstream. I don't want, when I left the government, I had a great run as a prosecutor. I felt like I made an impact in using the discretion of who to prosecute and why. But I really felt like by the time the case was worthy of prosecuting, something had broken in the system, right? And I really wanted to devote my time in private practice to develop a reactive defense practice, but also a proactive practice where I could help companies think like a prosecutor, become self-governing. And that's the biggest change I've seen, is this commitment. Historically, environmental law was about liabilities, punishment, fines, jail times. Now it's about reputation. The companies and the generational shift that Rich pointed out, my kids don't want to work. They're graduating from college. They will not work for corporations who aren't committed to make social and environmental impacts in a positive way. It's amazing in one generation how the shift was not about, oh God, let's avoid liability, to you got to earn a strong reputation and back up your words with real constraint. And that's what drew me out of the defense into the compliance world, was going upstream and try to prevent the problems, detect the problems, respond and permanently correct them. And again, help, instead of suing and prosecuting, to really help avoid things from catching on fire to begin with legally. So
is this actually, if we're talking about preventing problems, is this really a lawyer's job anymore?
Yeah,
go ahead, Kelly.
I was going to say, I think
the consultant will go last.
No, but I think it's really important. I mean, and I think, Rich and Peter did a really good job of summarizing. I mean, for my large clients who could be big multinational operations, it's their social license to operate. And that's what they want. That is what their shareholders want. That is what I think their workers want. And in the communities they are in, they need to have that in order to have strong relationships with, their employees, their neighbors. And that is a generation that wasn't the way it used to be. And now most corporations look at it through that kind of social license.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And Cymie,
go ahead.
Yeah, Cymie, in terms of in my current role as the Chief Ethics Compliance Officer, I've got 65 people on my team. 4 of them are lawyers. And so the people I rely upon are environmental risk specialists, environmental training specialists, communication specialists, people who can, again, respond, and investigators who have law enforcement backgrounds that want to help prevent and help detect. But like the training, it's the human element. It's not just the technical element. So I think the role of the lawyers, and I hate to say this, is getting lower than it used to be in environmental policy. And I think that a great consultant to be able to come in and translate and help us operationalize. I mean, as an outside lawyer, I honestly believe that spotting the problem accurately, diagnosing the problem was 80% of the journey. Having gone in-house, it is literally 15%, because you got to figure out what's the sustainable solution that involves 8 different inputs, and how do you implement it? And then how do you measure whether your corrections have done any bit of improvements? It's a fascinating project management related task that the lawyers have absolutely no role in. So it really is an amazing expanse. It really does take a village. So those of you who are oriented towards law, I wouldn't change my background for anything, but I depend upon people who are just as committed as I am, who have so many different skills. And what I've learned as an executive at Carnival is you surround yourself with people who don't have skills that you have to round out the team, which goes to another Cook skill, which is don't underestimate the social skills, because getting along with people and just communicating on an emotional level, I've had so many lawyers and who are far smarter than I am, but they just drive people crazy, right? And no one wants to be around them, right? So the ability to have your intelligence, your work ethic, but also be kind and be nice, and you don't need to, that emotional element, I tell my kids all the time, like, that's going to go far further than just your raw intelligence. So.
Rich, that sounds like your walk-on line.
I guess, yeah, geez. I will say this in defense of the future of environmental law. Things are changing. And so things like habitats are changing for endangered species. And so areas that were set aside for endangered species habitats are now shifting. That shift may impact areas where we've got people who live, or people who are doing other things, or opportunities for us to reassess how land's going to be used. We have legacy contamination issues that still haven't been addressed. There's legacy mercury contamination and sediments all around, all up the Northeast that go right into subsistence fishing areas for Native American tribes. The Passaic River has been an industrial riverway for over 250 years. Those people who live on the tail end of that towards the iron-bound sections of Newark still fish out of that waterway to eat. Subsistence fishing happens in Jersey as well. Legal opportunities for the legal community to do something about those things are going to be important. I would make an argument that with all the things that we're going to be seeing with regard to energy, water use in the West in particular, I already mentioned endangered species, what we're going to do about resiliency planning and maybe using eminent domain to take land away from people in order to set aside buffer zones for the absorption of superstorms. That's going to be a challenge. That's going to be something where we're going to comment on, but it's going to be a legal question to have to deal with. As for the other comments about social sciences, I'm one of 5 kids, and I can always tell when I'm with an only child as a lawyer as an only child. They want it their way and they want it now, and how can you possibly say no? And it really is a collaborative science and engineering and law and consulting world. And if you don't play nice in the sandbox, you're not going to play for long. It's really quite true.
So what for each of you was your best experience at Rutgers in learning how to get along with other people? And I'm mindful of the joke about I want my former group project mates to be there for my funeral so they can let me down one last time.
I'll tell you right off the bat, I grew up in a very insular, small town in northern Jersey, and my first opportunity to meet people who were, and I'm going to use a word that's not nice, but I'll say it anyway, different than me. Different religion, different skin tone, different gender, different sexual practices, all kinds of different. Diversity was not something that I expected to get out of college, and I did. And it's one of those things that it wasn't a forced thing. It wasn't like you all get in a room and get together and be nice. It just happened organically. I got a roommate that would I have guessed that I would have become best friends with this guy who I never would have even dreamed that I'd have an opportunity to meet someone from that area and he was from Newark. No, but I'm still in touch with them, still talk to them all the time. The diversity that Rutgers provided me with regard to opportunities to learn and interact and talk and just get to appreciate other people can't be beat, cannot be beat. And that's probably because of where we're located in the globe and in the United States. Not to malign anything, go to Iowa. You're not going to meet a lot of people who are different from you when you go to, if you're at the University of Iowa. You're going to meet other people from Iowa. You're going to meet other people in Nebraska from Nebraska. In Jersey, you get at Rutgers, you can meet people from all around the globe, and they're cool, and they eat different foods, and suddenly you're doing things that you never thought you'd be doing, and you're kind of digging it. That was me, at least.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's definitely kind of living in the dorm, living on campus housing, and just having an exposure both at Cook and then also, at the other colleges at Rutgers that attract a different type of student, folks with different interests, taking advantage of those opportunities was just a very eye-opening way to kind of learn about other issues and other people than kind of the Cook-centric world.
Yeah, and for me, it was interesting. We had a semi-scandal at the time where I think the college wanted to sell off some farmland.
Yeah.
At the time, and I was so adamant that this guy George H. Cook had donated hundreds and hundreds of acres, and to have it sold off. So me and a bunch of friends just started to do this like no sale campaign, and it was like, we're telling farmers not to sell their land to developers, and yet the university at the time was like contemplating. So I was the last thing of like any political activist, but at the time the drinking age was like 18 or 19. So you got a keg, you get some good friends around, and suddenly we were building a float, and we were doing like a no sale campaign that raised awareness about like preserving farmland in central Jersey. So it was absolutely fascinating. That led me with Roger Lacandro, another legendary influence for me, to always get involved in the Cook College Council. I never had any interest in student government, but it taught me a lot about how to craft solutions. That it led me to the Rutgers University. I was a senator at the time at Rutgers University. That taught me the whole parliamentary stuff. And Kelly, it did reinforce for me that I didn't want to go into the politics because it is a different art form that I knew that I didn't have that kind of skill set. It was fascinating. And then I just, I was in Voorhees for freshman year, and then Newell 25 in the Newell apartments, and just had a fantastic experience. Again, Alpha Zeta was another service fraternity I was involved in. And then, of course, Ed Levy and the intramurals was always a good bit. So if I could go back to my 19-year-old body and do intramurals again, I would try to be even better. But absolute blast.
Were you Alpha Zeta, or were there other organizations that you participated in?
Yeah, it's funny because, like I said, Peter's really good at stealing other people's lines. So that's good.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. But he's right. It was the idea of, I wouldn't say political activism, but expressing a voice, I guess. And I didn't think of it as politics. I didn't think of it doing stuff with AZ was like one of those things where it was just like, something that you had to do. I was just like, well, why wouldn't you help out? Why wouldn't you do stuff? And there's really the Cook community that I remember was more of a, well, don't just point to the problem, help pick that up. Let's fix it. There's a lot more of an attitude, and part of it I think was it's your first time away from home, and it's your first time to have an opportunity to not say, get your parents to tell you what your opinions are. But there was a real, and this is going to sound trite, and I don't mean it like that. There was a real lack of, that can't be done. No one ever told me that's impossible when I was at school. Someone said it was hard. Someone said it's going to take work. Sometimes the work was too much, and we didn't get to where we wanted to go. But no one ever said the I word. And to this day, I tell people, especially younger kids, that whenever I do teach classes or what have you, I do a lot of work with trying to teach about hazard and risk and some of the social parts of the environmental sciences that I work with. I say all the time, anyone tells you impossible is just someone who's quit. And I would tell everyone who's graduating now who doesn't know what their plan is, nothing, anyone who says impossible is they've already quit on something. Just don't be them. That's all you got to do.
So we have a couple of questions in the Q&A, and why don't we turn to those? The first one was Charlotte Berry asks, what was your biggest hurdle during college and after you graduated? Who wants to take that first?
I guess for me, it was just not knowing initially what I was going to do. And then I had grown up in New Jersey in a very blue collar family. And actually I went to graduate school in Indiana, and that was a big move. And that, just kind of dealing with that my senior year, where are you going to go next? Kind of leaving this safe nest that was for me always New Jersey and Cook was a pretty traumatic experience that kind of amazes me sometimes. And I say this to my mom, I'm like, People's Express was an airline that existed back then. They flew out of Newark, and I will never forget this. My mother drove me up to Newark, put me on an airplane, and I ended up in a cornfield in Indiana. And it was, I don't know what possessed me to do it, but it was, a good thing, but it was scary.
Three things didn't exist when I graduated: the internet, good computers, and something called a gap year. The idea that I could graduate and just take time to find myself and figure things out was not on the table. My father's like, you're out of college, gotta feed yourself, find a way. And it forced me to start looking for jobs that were looking for someone who had a science background, had a biology background. I backdoored into the EPA job, which ended up putting me on the path to doing environmental and occupational health to where I am today. And it was all because of the fact that I knew I had to do something, and I took a chance. And at that age and that time, I didn't think to myself, if I don't pick the right thing, it's for good or forever. It's not like I'm picking parts for my movie career or anything like that. I can make mistakes, and making mistakes is okay because you learn. And I just, took a jump. But it was the thing. I got out and I had to do something. So I took a chance, and I got lucky with my chance. I have a brother who took a chance and it didn't, and he ended up taking another chance, and now he's doing great. So chances, that was what I think my biggest hurdle was, being confident enough to, like you said, get on a plane, just jump.
Yeah, and I think I'd echo both responses, because I definitely relocated from New Jersey, which I had been born and raised, and I'd been out of the state maybe a handful of times, but I went down to UVA, and you want to talk about the New Brunswick to Charlottesville transition, eye opener, like just the north to south. I also had the transition of thinking like a scientist and analyze a lot of science courses. And suddenly in law school, it was like, oh, my brain, it was like left brain, right brain. And I had to morph that. And to Kelly's point, it took a long time for me to actually learn to write like a lawyer. And then I had to unlearn how to write like a lawyer and get back into just writing, just good writing. So, but the culture shock of New Jersey to Virginia was one thing, and also the uncertainty. And the thing that I always keep telling people along their path is, to Rich's point, trying something new, finding out that it's not really your passion is as valuable as finding something that is, right? So don't feel like, oh, I did this and I wasted my time. Like, the thing that I always tell people is, it's not a waste if it's helped you determine what's your passion and what's not your passion. It's just, and you 10 years from now are going to be a completely different person in terms of what you need. And so I am not one of these lawyers that was in one spot for 25 years. My career, when I really look back at it, I graduated in '86. I'm like 35 years now. It's like every 5 or 6 years, I would make a pretty significant shift from the government to a large firm, to a mid-sized firm, to my own firm, to like consulting, to in-house. And I wouldn't regret it. And what worked for me in my 40s would not have worked for me in my late 20s. So it's just, be patient with your career choices, and don't feel, as Rich said, I got to get this right from here to there. And I think this generation, Rich, is far smarter than we were, because my kids never worry about that. Right? My daughter graduated 3 years ago, my son last year. And when I keep giving that advice that meant something to me, they're like, I'm just not wired that way. And they're both, by the way, planning on 5 years from now, just taking a year and just traveling the globe. And I'm thinking, where does my time kick in, right? So I'm still waiting for my gap year, right? I think that's called retirement, but my fear is my knees and hips may not be in the position I need them to be when I have the time. We'll see.
Be different gaps. So we have quite a few questions that are coming in here in the last 10 minutes. Some of the questions are around, how did you narrow your focus on things? And maybe, were there skills that you felt like you really needed? For instance, do you really need to have hard science skills to be an environmental lawyer, to be an environmental consultant? What do you really need to do that?
I'll say it again. It's the opportunity to think. You got to be agile, right? In your thinking and your approach. You have to use some of the you don't have to memorize the organic chemistry book. You don't have to memorize or have on the top of your head the Krebs cycle. No one's ever going to ask you for that. And here's the fun fact: it's available to you anytime via the web. What really is important is someone who can critically look at something and say, we need to think about it with a large, for example, we have a chemical in the groundwater. It's hydrophilic, so therefore it's going to keep moving through the groundwater and not affix itself onto sediment. How best to approach that sort of thing? That's how you collaborate with that sort of around that. So you don't really need, I would say, hard science in order to be successful. What you need to be is agile and recognize that you have the tools in your head to pull apart a problem and look at it piecemeal, as opposed to, it's like Thanksgiving dinner. I walk in that room and I know that turkey's going to get eaten by the end of the weekend, but I couldn't imagine doing that moment. Stop looking at the turkey, start looking at the meal. Take it small and you'll do fine. There's no amount of technical stuff that you need to know in order to be that kind of successful, at least in my world.
So you basically need it to get through your classes, but then...
And if you're a lawyer, it's why you have expert witnesses.
Exactly. It's exactly right. It
And
truly
ruin
is.
my weekend instead. Yeah.
Nice. Exactly. it truly is a collaboration. And what I found, though, interesting in my field is I didn't know what I really liked until I really saw it in practice. I mean, it was so interesting that, Kelly, you may relate to this. My least favorite class in law school was criminal law. And lo and behold, when I was clerking, I saw prosecutors and defense lawyers and what they did in a criminal case. I'm like, I want to do that. Like, but criminal law in general, environmental prosecutions was awesome. But criminal law, I just didn't like it until I saw how it played out in real life. So I always found like people who think, you know, that's why I think both you and I had the internships to reinforce, get the theory and test it out to, does it, you know, speak to you as an individual with all of your unique talents? I think that's really where the proof comes in, and not just in book knowledge. It's get out there and try to get unpaid internships or paid internships just to see what people in the field do and see what you're drawn to and what you're averse to when you actually see it in real life.
I would also add a little bit of practical advice to all that. You will be surprised as your career progresses, how you can learn to like something you're really good at that people are willing to pay you to do.
That's right. No question.
I'm never going to work on that. And then you're like, wow, you're pretty good at this. And gosh, people are willing to pay you to do it. You'll learn to love it. So,
Yeah.
She ain't wrong. She ain't wrong.
Right.
It's having a skill that you exercise is a pleasure in itself, right?
yes.
Yeah.
So one of the questions is, what was one of your favorite memories that you have from working in your field?
You know, I was really lucky because when I worked in the Senate, I worked on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee and did congressional delegation trips with members all around the world, which was just, you know, went to Alaska a bunch of different times because the chairman was from Alaska and did tours up in Alaska, you know, went to Japan, went to all over Europe, just to look at different items. And that was pretty amazing and not anything I would have ever imagined I would have done.
That's a good one.
One part of my career, I worked for the Air Combat Command for the U.S. Air Force, doing public health consults at every single air combat base in the United States. And so it meant flying to different bases, different geographic, same like Peter, you know, maybe I made it into Pennsylvania, New York City, and Philadelphia, but that was the extent of getting outside of Jersey. And now I found myself in like the middle of South Dakota, talking to people who are really passionate about making sure that their life and their facility was healthy for the people who are there, their families are there, the people in the community. You know, I was brought up on this idea, as we all probably were at one point, that no one cares about all those business people. They don't care about the environment. You know, they just want to throw their waste into the water. And then you get around people who are like, no, we want to do the right thing. We just don't know what the right thing is. Tell us what to do. And then just doing that across the United States in places that I'd never thought I'd see. And always running into someone saying, thanks for coming. You were helping us make this place better. If that doesn't make you feel good when you go home, then, you know, you might as well hook up with the Grinch to steal Christmas. I don't know how to help.
And I think for me, I mean, one of the things that I think I'm a frustrated movie director. So as a trial lawyer, I had done about 24 federal trials. And when you amass large amounts of complex information and you begin to craft a story to connect with a jury in terms of defending an individual who's being prosecuted, to see that your theory plays out with a jury and getting a not guilty verdict, and it's the creativity. I hated preparing for trial, but once you were in the trial and the creative juices were flowing and your theory that you designed months ago actually bore out and been validated by a jury that actually rules in your favor, both as a prosecutor and defense lawyer. It's you know, the lawyering I loved was in the courtroom, and that's where the litigation, which is different than trials, all these lawyers that fight and piss and moan with each other on the documents. The real lawyering, in my opinion, is in the courtroom, the creativity. That's really where, for me, that's the real passion. And so once I had exhausted myself, I said, I got to go in-house and try to solve problems before they spark up. But that jury, when the jury would come back in with a favorable verdict, it's magic. So that was one of the career highs I would highlight.
I'm sad to say that we are almost at the end of the time, and I promised to hand back to Brian by now, but I'd like to steal at least 30 seconds or another minute for each of you to offer us your advice. What would you like to say as valedictory words to these Cook students? Well, can't we call them Cook students?
Today we will.
For us, the three of us, you can call them Cook students.
It's Cook
Exactly.
campus, so please.
I guess mine are pretty short. Do a good job, be a hard worker, and don't be an asshole. And it's
Exactly.
amazing how far those three characteristics can get you in your career.
Yep, that's great advice. And Rich? I don't
Talk
wanna steal-
less, listen more, especially you're around people who know more than you. They're there for you to learn from. Just pay attention, very important. The fact that you have to be nice, it should be second nature to you because you're going to cook, and that's the only type of people we take. But get yourself confident, fail upwards and you'll be fine. Make mistakes, it's okay. Take the chance.
Yeah, and I think I've reiterated a couple things throughout. It's just be flexible and be patient. Like, don't be too hard on yourself. And to Rich's point, you're gonna end up getting your ass kicked every now and then career-wise, and that doesn't mean it's over. It's just round one of many round fights, right? So pick yourself back up and be self-aware. I always told my kids in college, think, write, communicate, get along with other people, and become self-aware. Just know what your strengths are, know what your weaknesses are, and just try to build and continue to grow. And I've been really fortunate, I think all three of us, is just find something that is truly your passion instead of just a job. Like, if it's just a paycheck, we work way too hard these days to not to connect with what drives you. And again, don't get me wrong, work is work, but to feel as though you're contributing, you're making a difference with people and in a broader social causes, that's what kind of drives me. And obviously always be grounded in terms of family. I mean, I can't emphasize the support I've always had, just like having your support structure, great friends, family, others. And it's, career is important. It's not everything. So again, but I'm so jealous looking at Rich's passion puddle background because it makes me want to slap on my Rutgers hat and come. I saw that. I was very jealous. So, and we'll have to do this again live sometime soon on campus.
I'd like that.
We'd love to have you here. Thank you so much. Brian, I'm gonna hand it back to you and just say thank you so much. Peter, Rich, Kelly.
Thanks, Cymie. I agree. Thank you all very much, Kelly, Peter, Rich, Cymie. Thanks for taking on the moderating position for this. Great job. We're going to follow up with everybody with a follow-up email. The panelists have agreed to share their email addresses. So unfortunately, we didn't get to answer everybody's questions, but perhaps they can answer your questions in a follow-up if you'd like to do that. So thank you all very much. Thanks for being such an engaged audience. I've never seen so many questions actually from one of our audiences. So thank you very much for that. Wish everybody a great night. Best of luck to the students this semester. Do well. And we'll see you all soon. Like Peter said, hopefully, in the not too distant future, we can do this in person. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys.
Best of luck.
Look forward to seeing you all here.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.